Police quickly shut off access to Columbia High School after the late morning shooting. Authorities say a student identified as Jon Romano, 16 years old, a junior, had brought a 12-gauge shotgun to school and used it on teacher and coach Mike Bennett after a brief confrontation.
In 2004, at the age of 16, Jon Romano committed a school shooting. A couple of people were injured, no one was killed. He went to jail for 15 years and rehabilitated in prison, became an advocate for mental health before he was released and started working at a homeless shelter. While working there, he was attacked by someone with a sword and all of his limbs were partially amputated and he was almost killed. This incident was completely unrelated to the earlier shooting. Since then, Jon has amassed a following on TikTok, where some users have accused him of taking advantage of the crime that he committed and of lying about it. Regardless of how you feel about Jon as a person, it's worthwhile, I believe, to listen to his story and his perspective, which we're going to examine in detail shortly. We rarely get to hear from the perspective of a school shooter because part of their plan is not to survive it usually. We all repeatedly ask why they do it, but then there's pushback when we really start to examine their point of view because people think we're sympathizing with the monster. But you can't prevent or fix a problem if you don't understand it. You don't have to sympathize and agree with the offender's actions to try and work out their mindset, what might have led up to it, and how we can prevent it in the future. Understanding someone's history, their experiences, and how they've been victimized and harmed can help us understand their behavior when they do something wrong. But that does not excuse their behavior or make it acceptable. Showing empathy and providing support does not conflict with stopping them from doing something bad or holding them accountable for it. So let's get into Jon's story, which really runs the gamut and shows us that reality is far more complicated and nuanced than we like to admit, and many seemingly contradictory things can be true all at once. Jon was born in 1987 and he says he was abused as a child and had some severe depression in his teenage years. Court records show that in February 2004, at the age of 16, he wrote a letter saying that he wanted to die, took a shotgun and walked into a school. He first entered a bathroom and waited about 15 minutes using his phone to send text messages to his friends, warning them to leave the school. He then exited the bathroom and encountered another student. He pointed his gun at the student, who then ran into an open classroom. At that point, he saw two other students in the hall outside the bathroom. One made eye contact with Jon, who again pointed the shotgun directly at him and pulled the trigger. But the student dropped to the ground at the very moment that he fired, and the student wasn't hit. When the two students heard a shot being chambered and attempted to get away, Jon fired at them again, and the wadding of the shotgun shell struck one of them in the leg, so it was very close. Jon entered a classroom with the gun, but was pulled back out by Assistant Principal John Sawchuk, who attempted to wrestle the shotgun away from Jon. As another teacher, Michael Bennett, approached to assist Sawchuk, Jon swung around and the gun went off again, striking Bennett in the leg. The teacher who'd been shot urged Jon to give up the gun, which he did. Jon was arrested and transported to jail, where he was observed later that night laughing at television news of the incident. Later in prison, he focused on his own rehabilitation, became an advocate for mental health, and wrote a series of letters advocating against gun violence. He was released in 2020 and started working on redeeming himself and did things like giving talks to law enforcement to help them better recognise the early warning signs that might lead to a school shooting and other senseless acts of violence. He also started going into more detail about his version of the shooting incident on social media and claims that he never actually intended to harm anyone, and the whole act was a way to express to others how much he was suffering. He said he intentionally missed when firing and was just trying to scare students away, and a teacher was injured because the gun went off while he was being restrained by accident. All of this conflicts with the findings in court, which show that he aimed directly at people and had simply missed when he tried to shoot them. He may be lying, but it's also plausible that he really does believe his own version of the story. It's very common for our memory to become distorted when traumatic or shameful things happen. Our brains can be very unreliable when it comes to memory of traumatic events, so it's quite possible that Jon is being entirely genuine. Or there might be some narcissism involved. He might think he can gain something from it. I think there could be a few things interacting psychologically, and it's not necessarily malicious. A police walkthrough of the scene shows some shots did actually go into the ceiling, some did not, and none of this means that he didn't actually try to shoot people. Even if it's true that he had no plan to hurt anyone, at minimum, his intention was to cause serious psychological harm to others.
A lot of it came from hopelessness, where I didn't believe that I had a positive future going forward. I had given in to the despair within me that I believed my life was worthless without meaning or purpose. Every avenue I'd tried to take to get back on track had gone wrong. Unfortunately, I wanted to take it out on the people I blamed for it going wrong. I did spread a lot of pain and suffering that I know many people are feeling to this day and on this day. And there's nothing I can do to take that pain away, but I do my best to be here and to share my experience of why I did what I did so that we can prevent others from doing what I did and prevent other families and communities from experiencing what my community went through.
Aside from this question mark over his integrity, he has rehabilitated very successfully. He's demonstrated that he can live in society as a safe and productive human being. It shows how much we can change over time as people. And when successful, rehabilitation reduces recidivism, saves taxpayer money, and alleviates pressure on every other system. Keeping people in prison is expensive, and if they can be rehabilitated, they can contribute to society instead of being a drain on resources. In 2022, he started working at a shelter where he was helping to feed the homeless. On the 29th of August, a 42-year-old Randall Mason walked into the shelter and asked someone who was serving food what's for lunch. The server said, "Oh, it's written on the board." Randall was offended by that response and said, "Oh, it's written in the book for you, white devil." He kept ranting and saying offensive things before John told him that he'll have to leave if he's going to act like that. Randall agreed to leave and asked if he could go get his property from a locker, and John said, "Sure, it's your property." What you see now is footage of the incident. These arrows were added by John on TikTok, but it's very clear he's the one sitting down at the table. Randall comes through the door in the top left and he's holding the sword. John started running away.
You know, he catches me in the stairway and knocks me down, and I'm lying on the stairs, and I start trying to fight him off. I'm kicking at him, and he just starts swinging the swords, and he's chopping up my legs real bad, and I'm still holding them up even as they're falling apart. But my coworkers, I see them behind this guy, and they're just screaming, and you know, the guy, he just keeps going at it, and after I start to black out or something, and later on they tell me that he ended up leaving, and nobody knows where he went, and I'm blacked out at this time, but I end up waking up again when he's back, and he's standing over me, and he's, you know, people are screaming again, but one of my coworkers, she's sitting next to me because they were trying to like get me to stay conscious and everything. And, but the guy, he's telling her like, get out of the way, get out of the way. And, you know, I can tell, you know, he's reaching up like he's going to start swinging again. I start holding up my arms, and, he just starts chopping away again. And my arms start to basically fall apart. And but you know, I'm trying to protect my head, I'm trying to protect my chest and everything, and I don't know why, but eventually he stops.
An emotional Romano did speak to the media outside the courtroom.
Fortunately, with my hands, the nerves were severed in the attack, as well as my ligaments and tendons. That's why my hands, unfortunately, that's the only movement I have. And they say that it'll be years, maybe.
Randall's now in prison, and John says that he forgives him and that Randall was severely mentally ill during the attack. He thinks Randall was himself also failed repeatedly by many systems and ineffective mental health management. And that's true, but understanding the issues that lead to someone becoming violent does not excuse the act. Randall deserves a chance to show that he can reform just like John did. But if he can't show that he can rehabilitate, is it not our responsibility to protect other people and keep him locked up? Especially if he's been given a chance multiple times before to redeem himself, but he continues offending. Giving people access to victims after they've shown that they can't stop themselves from causing harm puts at least some of the blame back on our justice and health systems, in my opinion. We have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. Whether or not criminality can be proven due to mental health issues, we still have the separate issue of safety in considering whether they should remain in custody. whether they're kept in prison or some other kind of health facility. We should prioritise the safety of the community as a whole, but in recent years in Western countries especially, more often we seem to be making decisions based on ideology instead of working toward practical results.
I've owned a business on this block for 22 years. I've never seen it this bad.
He says he's fed up with increasing crime in this neighborhood.
The past couple of months, there have been a lot of violent homeless people starting fires, breaking private property, destroying businesses.
His bar security camera catching one homeless man kicking a sign. 2 days later, the same man returns, becoming even more violent.
And a couple of nights ago, one guy who's a big recurring problem in the neighborhood grabbed a giant 30-pound brick and threw it at myself and my employees, missing one of my employees by about an inch. Would have killed him if it hit him.
Police arrested the man you see in this video. He has 12 prior arrests for similar crimes.
You know, we're afraid he's going to come and stab us when he gets out of jail. It's a very big problem. We're all very scared.
Jon was working at the shelter to help people like Randall, but he also understands that the kind of behaviour Randall displayed on that day when he was being offensive to the people serving him should not be tolerated. If you want to support people in need but you permit them to harm others and harm themselves, do you really care about helping them, or are you simply serving your own narcissism? Is your first priority to actually help or to feel good about yourself? If you help someone and they don't reciprocate by working on themselves, they might only get worse. You might be enabling them and teaching them that their behaviour is acceptable and that they'll receive support no matter how poorly they act. People often see punishment and rehabilitation as incompatible concepts divided along political lines. But in reality, these are complementary approaches aimed at the same goal, which is reducing crime and violence. And we can use either or both, depending on the context. Early in life, we can address poverty and disadvantage through healthcare, education, and opportunities, and this has been shown to reduce crime in different areas. Targeted programs can reach the most at-risk groups, steering individuals away from harmful influences like gangs, extremist ideologies, or toxic subcultures. When those systems fail and people do bad things regardless, police step in at that point of crisis. They respond to immediate threats, they investigate crimes that have just happened, and they deliver offenders to the justice system. That's all the police really do, and we expect too much from them. You can't arrest your way out of this, but arresting people remains an essential component. At the same time, offenders can also become victims, and in fact, people who commit crime are far more likely to become victims of crime themselves. Just because something bad happens to you doesn't make you an angel or a role model. Just because you do something bad, on the other hand, doesn't mean you are evil or a lost cause. A person is more than the worst thing they've ever done. All of these things, again, are not mutually exclusive. There is no dichotomy. We use different strategies depending on the timeline and the situation. It's not about choosing sides based on political ideology. It's about doing what works. Do we want to reduce violence or not? Do we want to lower crime rates or not? Let's drop the ideology for a moment and focus on what works.